Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Retirement Cafe podcast, which is brought to you by MFP Wealth Management. This week, I am discussing the topic of death. Yes, that's right, death. It's a topic that has a stigma of being morbid, to even mention, never mind discuss. However, thousands of groups in 51 countries have met up with one another to discuss our finite lives and the inevitable. And that's all thanks to a truly groundbreaking idea that Jon Underwood in 2011 had the idea of Death Café. Now, I'm delighted to be joined by Jon's mother, Sue Barsky Reid, who co-founded Death Café to share her story with us. Welcome, Sue.
Thank you. It's good to be with you.
Well, so as I say, I'm very grateful for you taking the time out of your busy schedule to have a chat with us this morning. Can you tell me and our listeners a little bit about yourself and your background?
Okay. I've worked mostly in public service in my life. Started off teaching, took a break to have children, became a social worker, and then a psychotherapist. I worked for the NHS for quite a few years and stopped doing that 10 years ago, but continue with a private practice in psychotherapy.
Wow. Okay. So that's
I've got 4 grandchildren. That's important for you to know as well.
4 grandchildren as well.
Yeah.
Wow. So you've a busy life.
Yeah.
So the Death Café was founded by your son Jon Underwood in September 2011. Could you tell me a bit about why did he come up with this idea?
Well, Jon was a devout Buddhist. I don't know whether you're aware that he died 2 years ago.
Yeah, I am.
Yeah. He was a devout Buddhist, and I think part of being a Buddhist is recognizing and contemplating death. And I think it was from there he did some voluntary work in a hospice, and he had quite a good job in Tower Hamlets Council in the planning, planning services. And he decided he wanted to do work on death and dying.
Wow.
So it was my husband saw an article in the Independent magazine, newspaper, about Bernard Crittaz, a Swiss sociologist who was running something called Café Mortel. And this was talking about death and dying. My husband sent it to him, to Jon, and Jon said, that's what I want to do, and started thinking about death cafes. And we ran the first one in his house in Hackney in 2011. I wanted to facilitate it. And it was a success. And from there, we've now had, look, this morning, 9,116 death cafes worldwide.
That's
since
amazing.
That day.
That's amazing.
It is.
So tell me about that first event then. Tell me what happened, who came, what did you do? I mean, I appreciate it's a silly question to ask, what did you talk about? But actually, what did you talk about? How did it all plan out?
Well, it was mostly people Jon knew, friends and friends of friends. So there are about 8 or 9 other people besides Jon and I. And we planned it very carefully with all sorts of things to do, tasks to do. We planned it. We had an hour and a half talking about death, and a half an hour talking about life. And we had pieces of paper. We wrote what we wanted to do and burnt them. And he had an open fire. So that was what we did. And after it was finished, people talked about all sorts of things about death and dying. We had a Buddhist monk there.
Right.
And I'm trying to remember some of his friends. It was really successful. People just talked. And after it had finished, I said to him, this would be much better if we didn't have an agenda, if people just spoke. And I think that's why a lot of things say it was founded by both of us. I found I was helpful doing the model, but it was Jon's idea, really.
Yeah. So, so obviously you then John had this idea of making this model available across the world and to all communities and to all people. You know, how on earth do you start? I mean, that's a grand idea, and it's morphed into something quite amazing. But
Yeah.
but tell me what was his next steps and
Well,
what,
it went on social media and was picked up by the press.
right.
And I think it spread that way through. I suppose in the days of the internet, it's much easier for things to spread. And I think it was luck,
Right.
and perhaps a need for people who need to talk about death and dying, because it is quite a taboo subject. I still meet people today who say, "What? Death Cafe? What you know?" and shudder and say, "Oh no, I don't want to do that. Thank you."
And what do you think people get? I mean, obviously you've experienced it numerous times.
Yeah.
What do you think? What are the real takeaways that people get from coming to a death cafe?
I think the acceptance amongst the group, because people are self-selecting, aren't they? You don't go to a death cafe unless you want to. So
Right.
the people that go have got an interest in thinking about death and dying, and there's an acceptance amongst the rest of the group. And some of the conversations are really, really profound and interesting, sometimes sad, and very often funny. I mean, you laugh a lot. It sounds like a paradox, but people laugh a lot at death cafes.
So, could you give me an example of the conversations that people have? What is it that's so so interesting?
It's so wide ranging, from people's experiences of watching people die. I've known people from the Samaritans talk about supporting somebody who is committing suicide.
Mm.
Lots of discussions, because people from the industry, the death and dying industry, are quite interested. You often get people's curiosity about what happens when bodies are cremated, and so you get information from people that are there. I remember one woman saying, I try to talk to my children about the fact that I'm getting old and I'm going to die, and they just won't let me speak. And it's so refreshing to come here and just be able to say what I'd like. You know, people switch their relatives off quite often.
Sure.
They don't want to hear.
No, no. And of course, John suddenly died, didn't he? I mean,
He did.
You, I can only imagine that that he was someone who'd thought about this as well. I mean, from what I read, it was a shock. He wasn't ill. He was, So tell me a little bit more about that and possibly your takeaways from losing someone so close to you and so early.
I'm still processing it. It was a terrible shock. I live in Chester. I was down in London because it was my nephew's 40th birthday. And John was meant to be bringing his children over to celebrate. And I rang him up to see what time he'd be coming, and there was no reply. And then I got a call from the hospital saying that, because luckily I'd rung, they knew who to contact, and saying that he'd collapsed.
Gosh,
he had been ill, and he did have leukemia, but he hadn't had it diagnosed. He'd felt ill, thought he had some sort of flu or something.
Wow.
And he just never regained consciousness. Had a brain hemorrhage. That apparently this sort of leukemia, I think it's called promyelcytic leukemia, can cause hemorrhage.
Wow.
And so we had 48 hours in the hospital till my other son came over from the US, where they kept him on life support. And then they turned it off.
Gosh. Very challenging for you and for your family and for his children and wife. How do you view, obviously he had he had a view on death. You know, he was the instigator of this amazing legacy that he's left behind.
Yeah.
How I don't know. It feels that he definitely had something to give to the world then.
Yes, I'm so proud of what he did, and I told him that whilst he was alive.
Yeah.
I think what he's done is wonderful, and it's still growing. And it's quite amazing.
So obviously, he had an approach to he had some thoughts on death, but then obviously some thoughts around living as well. So what could you tell me a little bit more about his philosophy?
I've been watching some stuff on YouTube this morning, and it's so poignant, him saying, you never know when it's going to be the last time that you hug your child. So you need to make sure that you appreciate every moment and live for now. The point of a Death Café, as he put it, is to make the most of your finite life. So the realization and acceptance that we're all going to die should help us to be able to live a full life.
Absolutely. And, he was he was relatively young, I think, wasn't he?
He's 44.
Wow.
When he died.
Amazingly young. And for someone, in essence, that young to be so aware of how finite life is, I think it shows a huge maturity. Yeah. So people, how would people find out about a Death Café that they could come along to?
Okay, there's a very good website which he developed, deathcafe.com. If you go to there, you can put where you live, and if there is a Death Café near you, then you can, look up the details and go along. They're all over the world now.
Wow. And if for argument's sake, for any reason, there wasn't one being run in your local area, could you find out more? Is it possible to approach you and find out how to run one yourself?
Yes, absolutely. There is a lot of information on the website about doing that. But my daughter, Jon's sister Jules, actually runs Death Café now. Jon had the forethought to say, if anything happens to me, will you take it over? So Jules runs it, and I assist her. Wow. And Jules receives lots of emails from people asking about, starting a Death Café. But I'd be very happy if people wanted to get in touch with me or Jules to help them. I haven't run a Death Café since Jon died. I haven't felt like it was the right time for me to do it. Sure. But maybe in the future, I will go back to doing it. Yeah.
Well, his legacy and his philosophy is something that we can all take a huge amount from.
Yes.
And what I find interesting is that, and this is probably my own biases, I was thinking, okay, Death Café, that's going to be lots of old people turning up and talking about death, but of course this is not what I'm hearing. This is Jon's philosophy, is that actually, we should be talking about it so that it's not a despondent thing, is we talk about it because we also know how important it is to be alive.
Yes, absolutely. And young people seem to embrace the concept very well. There was a broadcast on Radio 1 not very long ago.
Yeah.
Lots of students have also run them as part of their courses in university or college.
Fantastic. So what do you hope to be the future of the Death Café?
I'd like it to carry on growing. Jon wanted to open a real Death Café and tried to get crowdfunding to finance it, but didn't get enough money. I don't know whether we'll ever think about doing that again. It's a possibility. An actual proper cafe. Was what he wanted to do.
So continually open for people to come and have conversations.
Yes. Run events and all sorts of things like that.
Mm.
Yeah.
Well, I can imagine. I mean, I think this is an amazing thing that you're doing, an amazing, as I say, legacy that Jon has left, and a gift to many communities. This probably takes. I mean, I think you're a non-for-profit organisation.
Absolutely, it's a social franchise. People sometimes accept donations to cover the costs, but no, we don't take any money. We don't want to make money. We don't let people sell stuff at death cafes and use them in that way at all. It's just for people to talk.
Brilliant.
We try and keep within the guidelines that Jon set.
Okay. And could you give me a bit of an idea of what those guidelines are, just roughly?
Yes, the guidelines are that there's no agenda, that they're not for profit. It's okay to have donations to cover costs. Since Jon died, people started putting a set amount for donations on their the stuff about the Death Café they were hoping to run. We won't let them do that anymore because that seems to be a charge. We don't want people to feel that they're charging. We have to have cake and tea as an affirmation of life. Thinking about death while keeping yourself alive is, and in a pleasurable way, because it's cake. It's not, bread and butter. Is really helpful. Other guidelines, yes. There's no. You are not supposed to plan it beforehand, so that it's a group-directed discussion.
Right. So no agenda.
No agenda. It shouldn't come. Sometimes I think sometimes because of anxiety about leaving a space where there isn't a plan, people want to have topics. Those topics are from the facilitator, not from the group themselves. Right. So that isn't encouraged. There's no end in view. It's just, you just are. You just sit and contemplate and say what comes up for you.
Great.
Sorry,
I think it's a fantastic initiative. And it is a topic that people aren't comfortable with, but we know that's going to happen. So yeah. I think it's a brilliant it's a brilliant opportunity for something like this. And I think I will put some show notes together with all the links about how they can find out more about you, more about the Death Café and the website, and how that they can contact you if they wish to set up one in their own area. I think it's definitely something here at the Retirement Café that we would like to do in our community.
Oh, yeah. Where are you based?
We're down in Mudderford in Christchurch, in Dorset.
Okay.
So the home of it's a very large retired community. People still move down to the coast to retire. So obviously, but yes, I think that this discussion should be for all ages, and I find Jon's philosophy remarkable, really, for someone so young to be considering this, and what a wonderful legacy to leave behind. So
absolutely.
I think you and your family should be very proud of everything that he set out to do and is continuing to achieve. There's not many of us who manage to leave anything behind, so to carry on, and this has got a good opportunity, I think, to really do some social good. Yeah. So thank you so much for joining me this morning. It's been really informative, and thank you for your for explaining how it all works, and I really do wish you huge success with this continuing on for many, many years to come. So until next time, this is Justin King, helping you feel more informed in your retirement.